Okay, Michael, take it away.
Hey, all right. Okay, so we are back, and once again, welcome everyone. We're going to have Sarah kind of do a quick announcement and announcement update.
Yeah,
So
Sarah and I, Michael, we're like the morning show announcers, right? So anyway, want to welcome everybody and just, to acknowledge that, we are on the land of so many indigenous tribes who live here and work and play and gather food and medicine and just want to acknowledge that in our discussion tonight that we're mindful of the way that they were stored in the land and hope to learn from them as we move forward. For announcements, just want to let people know that the gallery that has the history of the Lower Willamette Speaks is at Lloyd Center. It's on the upper floor where Ann Taylor's Loft used to be, if you know where that is. And it looks really beautiful there. And it's also a space that we can have field trips. So if you have a group that wants to come to the exhibit and also have an interactive activity, we can do that. We're all here at the Green Anchors River Center, and it is a work in progress. Thanks a lot to Doug Larson, but we do want to let people know that this is your river center. It's not just ours by any means, and that people can come here and work, have a meeting. So just to let you know, this is your river center as well. Thanks.
yeah, if there's any interest, please don't hesitate to reach out to Sarah or I or Doug. If there's any interest in wanting to come down and use the space here. We actually have a really good turnout online and here tonight, so it's pretty exciting to see everyone here. The next person we have up is who's going to give a little update on what's going on the river is Willie Levinson with Human Access Project, and I'm going to have Willie go for it.
Okay. So thanks, Michael. Everybody, it's great to be in the what do you guys call the center?
Well, we don't really have a name for it quite yet, but right now we're calling it the River Educational Center. Eventually, it will have a name though. Real soon. Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Well, it's great to be here, and it's great to see a lot of familiar faces. I'm here to give an update, very exciting update, that the Cathedral Park dock is going to be replaced this summer. How's that? So let me get into my presentation. I've got some slides to share. Okay, can everybody see my screen? Okay, I'm just going to walk through a few slides. This is the pathetic Cathedral Park dock right now, and to the right you can see the shameful shoreline that has been cleaned up quite a bit to the north. For those of you who don't know Human Access Project, our mission is to transform Portland's relationship to the Willamette River. Our vision is simply a city of love of its river, and we're driven by the very simple words of Jacques Cousteau: people protect what they love. So we just believe very deeply that if we can reconnect people to the river, they're going to see more value in it and be inclined to fight for it and develop a relationship with it. And as it is, I mean, we're in North Portland right now. There's very little access, but it's the story of all. According to Parks and Recreation, less than 5% of the central city has access to the river's edge. So yeah, this is our vision, mission, and objectives: build, use it, and love. So this is our board of directors and board of trustees. Just an awesome group of people by Maine Collaboration Group, and they all share the qualities of cooperative, people, committed, inclusive, and fun. So I love my team, and I consider everybody here part of our broader team as well. So we had the last big float this past year. It was our 10th year. We brought 25,000 people to the river through this event. It's great to just end it in our own way, on our own terms. We got this great cover out of it with Willamette Week, and we still actively have our River Hugger Swim Team program, which had a 10-year anniversary this past year. Swim across the Willamette and back in downtown Portland, quarter mile each direction. And we've had 1,000 individuals participate in those 10 years. This past year, we had 150 individuals, 65 first-time swimmers, and we're just about educating people how to swim in the river safely. So we require everyone to have floating swim bags, right caps. We charge $5 a swim. We pay safety kayakers $3 per session. So if anybody likes to kayak, it's you can get paid to paddle. Cool. And this year we actually made $1,500, so it's a self-sustaining program. So just some examples of some work we've done. Human access to us just simply means creating toes in the water access. And there's a lot of energy around improving habitat, and that is critical. But really, our focus is recreation. And ultimately, for me, habitat is really important because the difference between a pool and a river is that a river is alive. That's what really makes it enriching, because you really immerse yourself in nature when you get into a river. But in order to get people to the river's edge, they want places that don't look like, pick a bad word. So this is Tom McCall Bowl in downtown Portland. We have the big float. One of the first things we did was unrock the bowl, what we called it. So over a few years, we just had volunteers come down with the inmate for a cruise. We just picked up rocks and put it back on the bank because it just really didn't have a lot of love. And if you can see Charlie Hales on the right while he was campaigning, he even picked up a few rocks, actually. This is Poet Beach, again, that just says, hey, you got to start somewhere, but we just got a bunch of people together, cleaned up the beach, and made it look like this for nothing. And no surprise, people started using it. Mayor Hill got into office and championed the idea of creating Portland's first official downtown beach. Parks and Recreation at the time made us pay for the signage in order to put it up, which is really hilarious, but our relationship with Parks has changed tremendously over that time, as you can see. Audrey McCall Beach, we removed 200 tons of concrete over 4 years working with volunteers and inmate workers. We took the beach from this to this, and when you create a place that looks like a place a human would want to hang out, humans start showing up. So at this point, there was very poor access, no signage. We had to get permission from 10 separate agencies to remove concrete shelves, with the stipulation that we could not use heavy mechanized equipment. So we really kept it under the radar. It would just take one party to shut us down. Then Cathedral Park. So a lot of people were involved with this. Matt and Green Anchors brought much muscle to this, but it was great to collaborate with Portland Harbor Community Advisory Group and the Portland Harbor. Oh my gosh, I'm so tired. Community Coalition, of course, and also Michael Health Network at University of Portland. So this shoreline again was shameful. It was one of the most satisfying things I've been a part of, to know that this concrete and rubble had been sitting here probably for 50 plus years. And in one afternoon, we got 100 volunteers together and took the shoreline from this to this. So not only is that an aesthetic thing, it improves shallow water habitat for fish, and it's less dangerous. Then, this summer, again, in terms of the changed relationship we have with Portland Parks and Recreation, after 12 years of work, working with Commissioner Rubio's office in Parks and Rec, Parks and Recreation officially named 5 safer swimming beaches in Portland. So from going to fighting tooth and nail to have us put up switch your own risk signs, which they approved if we paid for all of them back in 2012, to 11 years later, 10 years later, to name 5 safer swimming beaches, it's cool. So all these things. This is a Portland Monthly article. There's not one thing that's going to make people all of a sudden decide they're going to get to the river, but there's different levels of continuum, and we just just keep moving the dial. The work of our organization is cultural change. Cultural change stuff. This is the south side of the dock, and joining us on the call is Kazmira, who reached out to me, North Portland resident, and just said, hey, there's this Metro grant available. Let's get rid of more concrete shelves. And at the time, I was just getting over the big float. I can't even articulate how burnt out I was at that particular moment. It took every little squeeze of juice out of me to get that done. I said, you know what? If you can write the grant, I'll help you and run it through Cathedral Park Neighborhood Association. I think it'll be stronger. But Kazmira made it happen with grant, worked with Cathedral Park Neighborhood Association got $10,000 to remove concrete chunks on this side of the river. And that will be happening this summer, again, in strong cooperation with Green Anchors. It's awesome to have Matt on the team. So let's talk about it. This is Selwood Park. I mean, wouldn't it be nice by the DES lab to have simple steps that go down the river on the north-south side of the dock, which now is so steep and inaccessible. This is a very easy thing to do. Last summer, Selwood got a new dock. You know, of course, Selwood and Cathedral Park bookend each other. And, you know, you would think if we're talking about equity that Cathedral Park might have happened first, but, you know, but it's going to be happening this summer. So the way this wound up happening, Mingus Maps' office championed it. I actually had a chance to meet with Mingus on Monday. He's just very fired up about getting this done. We applied for ARPA funds, American Recovery Act funds. We got $300,000 with the idea of using this for something that would bring immediate access to Portland. So we collaborated with Parks and Rec and identified a bunch of potential things. And really, Dylan Paul, who came to these concrete cleanups, works for Parks, said, hey, you know, we are basically $300,000 short of being able to replace the Cathedral Park dock. If we can do this, we could do it this summer. And I was like, really, this summer? So yep, this summer. So as of right now, that dock is going through procurement, and Parks and Rec is going to be reaching out to the community as we get closer, just to get community input on finessing the dock, but really just based on the footprint, the DSL footprint, it's going to have to stay pretty similar to what it is. So I've been working really closely with Laura Knudsen, also on the call, and Josie, just about, you know, obviously I'm never going to advocate for something that I don't think is in the city's best interest, because ultimately if you do that, that's a transaction. I'm about making, like, actually caring about the people who are making these decisions to continue to being able to do things. So the biggest question mark, no surprise, is the piling and whether or not new piling should be put in, utilizing the existing pilings. The pilings are in good shape. I mean, these are solid steel pilings. So at this point, the fallback plan is to utilize the existing pilings and just put a new dock in, which will basically have no impact on the beach at all, even though the sampling results, of course, come in. The beach area is, the risk is negligible. So that's really the plan. But ultimately, we're going to be trying to do multiple things with this dock replacement. Number one, in the corner of the dock, you see my cursor up here. Yeah. There was a harmful algae bloom that formed in the corner of the dock right here. And I'm hopeful that it was formed because of a marina effect. If you go to marinas, it's very common for harmful algae bloom to form in between the slips because there's not good water circulation. So the Selwood dock, the first time I've seen a dock like this, it was really cool that now, rather than dock sitting on the surface like a ramp, like a raft that just sits on it, it's now elevated by pontoons. So that allows more water circulation. The gangway is going to be elevated, is what they're looking to do. So it's not going to be sitting directly on the beach. Just the fact that the dock is sitting on the beach tells you that, no doubt, choking off some water circulation into that corner. And then we're going to be taking a look at the booms to see if the booms can be chopped into smaller segments so that it'll still be able to capture large woody debris, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a contiguous boom. So then there's going to be a really big opportunity when the dock is out. So just talking with Josie and Laura, we're going to be coordinating so that when the dock is out, EPA is going to be able to come in and do some testing with some of the equipment. We're going to be working with Matt from Green Anchors to bring in some of his equipment to have better access, get rid of piling, some of the bigger stuff. So we're just going to try to leverage as much out of it as possible. But I'm just super excited about just, you know, once this dock is replaced, once we remove those chunks, I mean, that's going to be tremendous impact. And ultimately what inspired me to start working on this was just all these meetings that have happened for years and years and years, nothing happening. It was just kind of like, there should be nothing stopping us from doing this work. And all of it was people power. So, you know, really excited about this and just, you know, really grateful to be able to partner with you guys. So does any questions?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I noticed in the pictures of the sailboat dock, they don't have a chain link fence on it.
yeah, I don't know if my personally, I want to change like that's at the dock myself.
Excuse me for interrupting.
I don't,
This is Scott Burr, the online advocate. Willie, your voice is kicking out. We're not able to hear you online.
okay, I'm sorry. I'm turning my head in my thought. Yeah, my personal preference, I mean, it'll be interesting to see what the community feels like. My sense is that the regional.
The audio is still,
So Laura would think that more people can use the dog if it's fenced. Yeah, children. Yes. Yeah, so Laura was saying that it's, a variety, there's a large demographic that goes down with, children, people with mobility issues. So this is way that.
hi, this is Scott Burr. We're not able to hear you guys. I'm also getting notes from the audience. Laura Shearer is also not able to hear. And I see you talking, Michael, but I'm not hearing anything that you're saying.
All right, can you hear now?
Oh, yeah. You sound very good. Also, there's some more people that have chimed in saying that they cannot hear.
Yeah, so sorry about that. Okay, yeah, so okay, so it looks like we have, let's see if we have your, okay, can't hear well. Okay, all right, yeah, sorry about that there, folks. We're still working out the kinks, but we're getting there. All right, well, thank you so much, Willie. Thank you so much for coming down here and sharing that. Are you done?
Yeah,
okay.
Thanks for having me.
All right,
Appreciate it.
and we do have before we jump into our main presentation, Laura Shire, I wasn't quite sure if you were wanting to share like maybe a couple of moments about sure. There you are. It's like, 8 is enough, or with squares on here trying to yeah, just wasn't quite sure if you wanted to talk about habitat on Willamette River. Just a brief summary, or and then we'll love to have you back, and be able to present to the community. But just wanted to give you a little bit of a window here so that we can jump into our main topic.
Sure. Can you hear me okay?
You sound good, Laura. This is
Okay.
Scott.
Well, so I'm Laura Shira. I'm an environmental engineer and hydrologist. I work with Yakama Nation's Fisheries program, and Yakama Nation has been involved in Portland Harbor cleanup issues, trying to get it listed since back in around 2000. I've been working on the site for about 7 years now. And Yakama Nation has always been trying to push through the RI process, through the feasibility process, through the proposed plan and record of decision process, and now remedial design, trying to push for consideration of habitat and biological information in the remedial design process. And we haven't had much success until recently. And we're very worried that we're so far into this process that we don't know what's going on biologically or with habitat, and we aren't considering that in design. We're going to end up with designs that might even make habitat restoration goals not possible to accomplish. And so we had a brainstorming session with EPA last week. It went really well. And we're trying to figure out a way to really push to have habitat and biology as part of the conversation at Portland Harbor. And so we wanted to try to organize a series of meetings. We were thinking that the community groups in Portland Harbor could help with us as, you know, maybe a venue to do those to have those conversations. But, you know, one, to brainstorm, you know, what are the needs and goals and vision for habitat all up and down the corridor. I know the trustee council has put together information on 40+ sites. The city of Portland River Plan has put together information. It's not available now. I think it's been rescinded, but it has put together a lot of scientific information on what might be needed spacing wise, but trying to get an understanding of what really would make a habitat corridor, a series of stepping stones, a string of pearls that's needed to provide habitat up and down the corridor. Even in places where there's huge, long industrial stretches, there's still possibilities to be able to place habitat projects in those areas. We know that the NRD process, the cleanup process, might not accomplish a lot of that need, but we want to make sure that the RD process, the remedial design process, considers it so that it leaves a slate that we can continue that good work of working towards putting in those habitat projects where they're needed. And so we wanted to get together visioning. We wanted to get together to discuss what are the incentives, needs, goals, things that prevent us from doing this work, or things that would incentivize this work for the community groups, the PRPs, everyone involved, so that we can find commonalities and push forward some of these projects first that we can find a lot of energy for, and to talk about strategies and funding opportunities. So that's what we're working towards, and we're hoping that folks like all of you on the line can help us or connect us with people that are interested in participating in these kinds of discussions. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for filling us in on all that. And we are in solidarity with all of that for sure. And I'm hoping that we can be able to work together soon, on getting the habitat that not only the tribes deserve, and we and community in Portland deserve, but also what the ecology and the river deserves. So I'm super excited about that. But tonight we're going to go ahead and talk about salmon. So that's what we're going to be doing this evening. And we have with us from the Department of Fish and Wildlife, Matt Barr, who is a biologist. Matt is also a project leader at Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife at the North Willamette Coast Range Watershed District in Clackamas, Oregon. He's also a project leader on ocean salmon and Columbia River program, and has carried out ongoing work on bisphenol A, BPA, and has done research associated with the Northern Picminiwa Management Program at the Dalles Dam as well. And I'd imagine he probably had some other things that he can tell us that he's been doing too. So without any further ado, I'll go ahead and bring Mac on here. Thanks, Mac.
Hi, folks. Hey, thanks so much for having me. I'm going to go ahead, and I have a presentation here for you guys. And so I'm going to go ahead and start sharing the screen. We'll see how that goes. All right. Can everybody see that?
Looks good. This is Scott Burr.
Great. Okay. So thanks so much for having me. Tonight I was going to talk a bit about salmonids in the Portland Harbor. As Michael said, my name is Mac Barr. I'm a district fish biologist from the North Willamette watershed. I work for the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, also known as ODFW. So a little presentation outline here. First I'll just further introduce myself, go over the watershed, Then we'll talk about general salmonid biology and life cycles, an overview of habitat needs, an overview of some of the urban issues that confront these species, a few things that you can do to help. And then Michael and Sarah had submitted some questions. So I will respond to those questions. And then they also submitted some photographs of the lower Willamette and the Portland Harbor, and we'll talk about those and discuss those. And then at the end, assuming everybody's still with me, I'll take some more questions that you have. So yeah, I relatively recently moved into my role as the district fish biologist for the west side or coast range of the North Willamette watershed unit. Been in my current role for about 1.5 years now. Prior to that, the audio was a little bit cut out with Michael, but I worked on a project focused on the Columbia River of researching fish predation in relation to the Northern Pike Minnow Management Program. And that's funded by the Bonneville Power Administration, a different BPA. So the North Willamette watershed, here it is here shown on this map. As you can see, it is quite large. And so for the district fish biologists, we've kind of divided it in half. And so I have the west side or the Coast Range unit, and that includes the major rivers there are the Clatskanie River, Tualatin, and the Yamhill. And then my colleague, Ben Walzak, is responsible for the east side or the Cascade unit. That includes the Sandy, the Clackamas, and the Molalla rivers. And then we sort of split the Willamette River. And I should also say that, as you guys are probably aware, Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife participates in the Portland Harbor Trustee Council. However, that's via our water program. And ODFW staff, Becky Anthony, participates on the restoration committee there. Government agency, broadly speaking, we've got our fish division that I work in. We have a wildlife division. We have a newly created habitat division. And then we have a water program that sort of sits at the middle of that has a nexus of both fish, wildlife, and habitat, and water quality, and hence their role with the Portland Harbor Trustee Council. So moving right along, let's get to the fish. Salmonids. What is a salmonid? So salmonid is the common name for fish from the family Salmonidae. And this includes salmon, both Atlantic and Pacific salmon, trout, whitefishes, as well as char and grayling and caimans and lamooks. And so salmon, trout, and whitefish, mountain whitefish, can be found here in Oregon and on the Columbia River. Char and grayling are more commonly seen in Alaska, and caiman and lamook are Asiatic trout. So salmonids of the lower Willamette and Portland Harbor area include steelhead trout. So you'll often hear people say salmon and steelhead, or use the word salmonid because that encompasses both salmon and trout. In this case, as you may know, steelhead is an anadromous rainbow trout. Anadromous meaning that it spends part of its life history at sea. And steelhead get much larger than your typical trout. They can be up to 12 pounds. We also have spring and fall Chinook. Chinook salmon is king salmon. The larger species, adults can reach 20 pounds. Then we also have coho salmon. Those guys, full-size adults, are a little bit smaller, maybe 15 pounds. And then last but not least, we also have cutthroat trout. Cutthroat trout, mostly utilizing some of the smaller tributaries associated with the lower Willamette River. So the biology and life cycle of salmon and steelhead, as you may or may not be aware, the technical term for that is anadromous. They're anadromous fish. And so if we sort of start at the top of the circle here, and think about two adult fish, a male and a female, pairing together and courting each other in freshwater stream. They will spawn, and the eggs are buried in the gravel, and eggs will stay there in the gravel, in the sort of, to get oxygen there in the interstitial spaces between the rocks, and they'll hatch, varying anywhere from 1 to 3 months. And then, so in the upper right corner, you can see the photograph of some salmon eggs there. Those eggs are eyed. You can also see an alvin has just appeared. Alvin has just appeared there with its yolk sac. And so those are really tiny fish. Those guys will hang out in the gravel for 1 to 5 months. And then the fry emerge. And the fry and juvenile fish, the juvenile salmonids, can stay in freshwater for up to 4 years. And then we move on to the life phase known as smolts. Smoltification is the process of this fish essentially getting ready for saltwater. And so those guys are starting to migrate and mature and are heading downstream out towards the ocean and spend some time in the Columbia River estuary, acclimating between saltwater and freshwater and undergoing some physiological changes there. And then they will spend several years in the ocean, anywhere from 1 to 4 years in the ocean, depending on the species, and then come all the way back. And as you're probably aware, salmon and steelhead typically return to their natal stream to spawn. That is to say that they return to the same stream where they were hatched and where they were first born. So an overview of habitat needs. Salmon and steelhead, salmonid, and trout need cool, clear, clean water. So less than 65 degrees Fahrenheit is optimal. Temperatures above 70 degrees can actually be lethal. We know that temperature issues with water is sort of a water quality parameter that contributes to stress in these fish. They also need complex habitat. So that includes habitat with large wood, gravel. Of course, gravel, as I indicated earlier, is utilized for spawning. But then also boulders provide cover and differences in hydraulic flow that these fish prefer. And then also a diversity of in-stream habitat. This includes pools and riffles. This photograph here you can see is a ripple, this sort of whitewater chute coming out into a pool below it. Those riffles are great, can also provide cover for juvenile fish and adults too, for that matter. Another photograph here showing a pool with large wood, these root rods in there, and some gravel, and it's also a clear, clean, and healthy looking stream. Last but not least, these fish are migratory fish. They're native migratory fish, so they need unrestricted access to the spawning and rearing habitat. This photograph is of a culvert, which is providing a stream simulation approach where the stream is sort of existing inside this culvert. And so that's sort of one of the main action areas that my colleagues and I across the state often work on in terms of improving fish passage, ensuring that these structures will meet criteria and perform to allow fish to both move upstream and downstream. And we do that thinking about the fish that are sort of the most vulnerable or the worst swimmers. So that's usually going to be juvenile fish. So on to the other side of the coin are some threats or issues, if you will, that are detrimental, habitat issues that are detrimental to salmonids. Urbanization and development, warm water, dirty water that's contaminated or has lots of sediment in it, a homogeneous habitat, invasive species, and barriers to passage. So this is an image showing you an aerial map of lower Willamette and floodplain And then overlaid on top is the development and urbanization. Not surprisingly, we live in a very urban environment, and that has impacts not only on the Portland Harbor and the Willamette River itself, but all of the tributaries and rivers that branch off of it. This is an eroded bank. We've got some non-native vegetation there, and high sediment water. High sediment lows can make it difficult for fish to breathe, to respirate. If it's significantly dirty water, that impacts their gills. And then also, as I mentioned earlier, the eggs are buried in the gravel. So if you have too much sedimentation, you can actually bury those eggs or just reduce the hyporheic or subsurface flows through those gravel that provide the oxygen for the eggs. This would be an example of a homogeneous habitat where we've got a uniform bottom to this stream. It's channelized and has seawall on both sides. In terms of invasive species, I'm speaking mostly here to riparian vegetation. So these are plants that grow on the stream side or riverside. Reed canary grass being one of the main culprits, as well as Himalayan blackberry. And then also passage barriers. So those can vary. Those could be a full dam that doesn't have a fish ladder, or a juvenile bypass collecting facility, so larger dams. They can also be a small push-up dam like pictured here. Even just small impediments to the natural movements and migration of these fish can be detrimental and stressful. Other examples would be things like perched culverts. So this is a culvert that is passing water, but that's too high of a jump for salmonids to make. And so we have rules in place to ensure that if new structures going like this, or if this structure needed to be worked on, it would be replaced with a fish-friendly structure that have a jump height of 6 inches, depending on the species present in the stream. So what you can do to help, improving the riparian area, providing complex and diverse habitat, moving passage barriers, and considering restoration projects. The group tonight is probably aware that Portland Harbor Superfund has been utilizing some restoration banks. Thus far, there are 4 sites, 3 of them down here in the lower river, the Alder Creek site, Harborton, Linton Mill, and Reinerson. And so these are places where relatively large scale restoration projects have been completed, and then by other entities, and then entities involved in the Superfund are potentially able to purchase credits to offset the negative impacts associated with the other activities. So this is Alder Creek restoration project. This is there near the tip of Saudi Island. You can see a nice sandy beach that's been sloped back, and this represents an off-channel habitat, which is beneficial for rearing juvenile salmonids. And similarly is the Linton Mill restoration project, where this alcove was sort of created. So again, this is representing this is off-channel habitat. You can see native vegetation has been planted here in the foreground. In the middle of the picture, in that alcove area, are large wood. These are, let's see if you can see my cursor, but so those would be wood that's been placed vertically in this alcove area, and then cross members that are in stream and that have those larger root wads that I showed earlier that'll can really provide some quality habitat for these fish. And more recently, PGE completed their Harborton restoration project. So this image shows this large wood, but during high flows, this area inundates. And I was there relatively recently with some PGE biologists. The site's looking really great. It does activate, as we say, so water comes in and activates that large woody debris. Again, that's been anchored down and intentionally put there. These are really large pieces of timber. And the exciting thing there was that soon after completion of this project, we saw utilization of habitat by juvenile salmonids. And this is just a really cool photograph I snagged off the internet here, but this is showing you some juvenile fish, some juvenile salmonids utilizing the habitat associated with that large woody debris. You could imagine sort of the bottom of the root wad, providing good cover from predation. It may allow for feeding and foraging. There can be some terrestrial insect inputs associated with this, as well as just macroinvertebrates, an invertebrate community associated with natural organic structures, which are beneficial to feeding, rearing, and development of these fish at a critical life stage. Okay, some other things that we can do to help, some things at home. Hopefully everybody's aware of this stuff, but it's always good to remind you not to pour oil or other pollutants down storm drains. Use non-toxic alternatives to fertilizers and pesticides. Try to keep the use of pesticides away from rivers and streams. Follow instructions carefully on the label. You can use alternative methods of planting pest and disease resistant plants instead of needing to use chemicals. Sweeping driveways and patios, clean instead of hosing them down. All that stuff eventually ends up in the storm drain and then goes into eventually into our river. You may or may not be aware there was been several studies done recently indicating that some of the chemical compounds in tires on lots of cars is detrimental to salmon. So that's just one example of like not something we would normally think about, but a small particulate that can negatively impact native fish. I don't know how many folks on the call have livestock, but maybe you have friends or family that have livestock or have a stream on property or wetlands. And so keeping those animals away from the stream side can help ensure that we don't have bank destabilization and make sure that wastes are dropped away from water bodies. And then also just planting a lawn all the way up to the stream. We like to see a buffer in this riparian zone. So shrubs and trees are great. They provide bank stabilization and shading for the stream, which is super important in the era of climate change, as well as other organic inputs into those bodies of water. Other stuff you can do to help, volunteering, participating in a cool group like like you are tonight. Nutrient enrichment activities. So that would be potentially working with my agency to get adult carcasses from a hatchery, and then taking those out and out planting those in streams to provide nutrients. Other small steps like invasive species removal, riparian planting, and garbage removal. And so thinking kind of just reminded me of some of the great stuff that Willie showed earlier tonight with the Human Access Project of folks one by one, hand by hand, removing some of those larger concrete bricks. It's pretty awesome. All right. Moving right along. So you guys submitted some questions and I will do my best to answer them. I'll be honest, these are pretty tough questions and not all of them have clear singular answers, such as the nature of nature. So to do salmonids rest briefly or overwinter in the area? And my response is that it depends. I think that adult salmonids are most likely to move pretty quickly through the Portland Harbor. So those fish are on their way to do their business, right? They're going looking for spawning habitat. For the most part, the lower Willamette River is not really a spawning area for these fish. It may have been historically, and potentially a pie in the sky goal would be to have restoration to where we could have spawning fish in the lower Willamette. But for the most part, these adults are going to move through pretty quickly. They're on their way further upstream, further upriver, and into the various tributaries and other rivers. Juveniles, however, could potentially do both. They may rest or overwinter. I think that overwintering is probably a little less likely. The migration timing depends on a number of factors. And in many ways, the lower Willamette River and the Portland Harbor represents a simplified habitat. And so there's just sort of less opportunity for them to rear and feed. There's less of the side channel habitat that I talked about previously. And so I think they're going to move through a little bit quicker than perhaps a more diversified, higher order stream. But there's a bunch of different factors that relate to migration timing of juvenile salmonids. Water temperature is super important. So with very cold water, that can delay migration. Will actually delay emergence from the gravel at the very beginning too. But flow obviously is going to be important as well. So if it's very high flow, we're going to expect to see juvenile fish move through an area relatively quickly. If we have low flows or more stagnant water, we could see slower migration. And so at times when the Columbia River is very high, as you may be aware, it can back up into the Willamette, and so that sort of slows the overall flow through the area down. And so I would, in those cases, the migration is going to take a bit longer. All right. So a rest of a few hours must be different than a winter's rest. How? Well, I think that a longer rest in the Portland Harbor potentially represents a longer exposure to less desirable habitat. As you guys may or may not be aware, the longer fish is resident or stays within the Portland Harbor, they're more likely to accumulate toxins. And so the Oregon Health Authority has recommendations on fish consumption. And typically you see that migratory fish, such as salmonids, are usually have lower levels of toxins. And so if they were to stay in overwinter, I would expect you to see higher levels of toxins. But you also need to consider whether or not it's going to be suitable habitat for them to overwinter. Is there going to be food for them? Are there going to be predators? Are they going to be able to avoid them? So those are some factors that would play into whether or not the fish would overwinter versus rest. Is there a schedule for arrival, rest, departure, and return? No, not really. Mother Nature's schedule is inherently variable, but in general, you can think about adult salmonids returning and moving upstream in the fall, and juveniles out migrating and moving downstream in the spring. But there's variability therein, and it varies across species. So spring Chinook are called spring Chinook because they return to freshwater in the spring. So they'll start migrating in February, as early as February, and go all the way through July. But the peak migration tends to be in May and June. We also have a fall Chinook. Those, again, are called fall Chinook because they return as adults in the fall. We'll see them in the lower Willamette River in August through October, probably with a peak in September. And then later into the year, coho will start to arrive. You see some overlap there with their peak abundance is typically in October. And then adult steelhead could be found throughout the Portland Harbor throughout the year. And then again, a fair bit of variability in terms of juvenile salmon outmigration, but broad period of March to June. But some Chinook, juvenile Chinook will outmigrate in the fall. I don't want to spend a ton of time on this slide. This is from a colleague of mine that's done extensive research in the upper Willamette and the lower Willamette. But the take home from this slide is just that there are variable life histories and variable timing at which juveniles and adults will move through the system. And so if we're looking at these dates, the reality is that the Portland Harbor has salmonids present year round. There are certain times of years where we might expect them to be more abundant or less abundant, but really fish are moving through the system year round. What do different salmon need at different times? Well, I had, as I previously mentioned, across all life stages, salmonids really want cold, clean, and clear water. They need to be able to breathe, move, migrate, and avoid predators. As adults, they're trying to migrate and move and reproduce. And as juveniles, their goals are to feed and grow. The needs can vary a bit by species in terms of where we might expect to find them and what those fish may be associated with. Juvenile Chinook salmon can be found at depth, but they can also be found in shallow sandy habitats. Versus coho tend to be found closer to shore in shallow water habitat, somewhat more exclusively. We say it's for the salmon, but what exactly does that mean? Well, I think that what benefits salmon benefits us all. A Portland Harbor with cold, clean, and clear water, multiple ecosystem services and economic benefits. Salmonids are critical species in the watershed. They're somewhat of a keystone species, and I think that they are representative of other species of fish. And so what benefits salmonids is also going to be beneficial to other native species, which include sturgeon and lamprey, northern pike minnow, and three-spined sticklebacks. I know you guys love three-spined stickleback as much as I do. Super cute fish. They're only about 1.5 inches, really tiny guy, but pretty cool. They've got those 3 spines on the dorsal there to protect them from predation. How does the lower amount of salmon impact the forest ecosystem? What's being done to improve the situation? Well, I would say that you're going to have less nutrients in the system as a whole, because when these, well, actually, now that I think about it, I left probably a critical thing off the diagram of the circular slide of the salmon life history. Salmon typically spawn and die. Steelhead can reproduce multiple times, but the adults die after they've spawned, and their carcass represents this pretty good piece of nutrient enrichment. And so you could expect to see differences in plant communities. There's an interesting study done recently that demonstrated high densities of salmon-bearing shrubs in association with high densities of salmon carcasses. These salmon carcasses not only provide nutrients for plants, but animals as well. Certain animals in the forest scavenge on them and eat them. What's being done? Well, habitat, connectivity, and protection. So sort of the less fun aspect of my job to some extent in terms of reviewing lots of permits and making sure that if ODOT's gonna replace a culvert or replace a bridge, that bridge is going to allow for fish passage. And then working cooperatively with ODOT to do that. They have some great fish biologists on staff, and also working for protections with other state agencies, such as Department of State Lands on protections during construction activities, removal fill activities where you're going to have heavy equipment either in stream or near streams and rivers. And then sort of more appealing are the restoration projects, both big and small. Restoring habitats is ultimately going to be beneficial to the family of fish and to those species, and which should contribute to rebounds in population, and then allow those fish to move on up into the forest ecosystem. And then last but not least, to a lesser extent, in so much as we're not able to outplant carcasses everywhere across the state or across the watershed, but as I indicated earlier, sometimes we'll partner with volunteer groups and head out to a stream and take excess carcasses from a hatchery and place those carcasses out there for nutrient enrichment. Okay, what types of human-made habitat improve salmonid resiliency? Well, I think removal of fish barriers is super important. This is providing fish passage. And so when we remove barriers, we allow these fish to have access to different habitats and streams, and give them increased rearing opportunities. And just in general, thinking about having fish that can access different streams is really valuable from a resiliency standpoint, in terms of it's basically a diversity of opportunities, diversity of places where these fish may be present, diversity of times they may be present. It's somewhat similar to investing. You don't want to put all financial investment, that is, you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket, so to speak. Probably don't want to have only, I don't know, Tesla stock or something like that, right? So you want to have a bunch of different investments. And so similarly, we want to see that for these fish. The fact that they do have what we would term plasticity in the life histories, right? So they don't all leave at the same time. Some may leave early, even within the same species. And that ultimately provides resiliency for these fish and has really allowed them to persist and evolve and be present for so many years. Moving back then, access to other places when the present place is inhospitable. So this is super important in thinking about climate change. So cold water refugia, these would be streams that we know that have like a naturally cooler temperature. We want to have fish that can have access there. Maybe this is not the stream where they want to go and spawn, but they're able to duck in. And excuse me, this is a behavior of fish that we've seen on the Columbia River, right around the mouth of the Deschutes River, right? So those are salmon that are migrating and want to head way further up, maybe all the way up to the Snake River. They'll temporarily go into the lower Deschutes River, just because that's providing this desirable cold water temperature for them, particularly if they're moving in summer months when water temperatures are elevated in the Columbia River. And again, the side channels provide an important role in that they can allow fish to just get out of high flows. So if it's just ripping, current's really moving through and there's lots of debris in the water, a little sheltered area, a little alcove, a side channel. This is a place where a juvenile fish is going to be able to take some refuge and benefit. Again, streamside vegetation, super important. Just planting a tree. I realize that's not necessarily human made, but an anthropogenic activity, a human activity. We can go out and put some native trees and shrubs in the riparian habitat. This is going to help keep those rivers and streams cool. And again, also provide a variety of additional organic inputs, natural organic inputs to the watershed. And then also, again, removal of non-native invasive plants is going to benefit habitat and improve overall resiliency for these fish. This one, I wasn't sure if I even wanted to bring it up. What is the trajectory for salmonids and their habitats given the looming climate chaos? Well, is the glass half empty or is it half full? On the half empty side of things, to be honest, the trajectory is not great. As I said, one of the main factors for salmonids is cool water. And then another big piece here in terms of life history, remember that these fish spend either 1 or up to 4 years in the ocean. And so what we're starting to see is that ocean conditions can play a really big role in the number of adults that return. With climate change, you have these changing ocean conditions, which, long story short, result in less available food. You have less productivity. That's primary productivity and secondary productivity. So that's plankton, phytoplankton, and zooplankton, and then on up the food chain or food web. And where we're seeing if there's just not enough forage for salmon in the ocean, we have low adult returns. Also associated with climate change are harmful algal blooms, warm water temperatures where these algae bloom and take over rivers and lakes and can negatively affect salmon, unnatural flows, and then also thinking about some of the fish that are migrating through the Portland Harbor. Have blocked access in the upper reaches of the Willamette River. So certain upper reaches of the McKenzie River and the Santiam remain blocked. On the flip side, glass is half full. We have laws to ensure fish passage and screening and water rights to preserve water and to ensure that fish aren't being diverted or through screens through water intake devices, so the fish aren't being harmed. The fish are able to access their habitats. Recently passed, the Jobs and Infrastructure Act has made lots of funding available. Like there are billions of dollars, millions of dollars available here in the Pacific Northwest for salmon habitat and restoration projects. I think also on the glass is half full is you and all the people present here tonight. I think you're here because you care and you're interested. And then also don't forget that you can vote. And so your votes count, and voting makes a big difference in terms of laws that are passed or funding that's made available for these types of projects. All right. Moving into the sort of third phase of this presentation, going to take a look at some of these photographs, and I will just sort of talk about them. So this looks to me like we've got a series of old pilings and some old bricks. It's not great. It's not terrible. It is somewhat of a shallow water habitat. So the juvenile salmonids will utilize shallow water habitat. That's sort of where they're migrating and hanging out. But these pilings are often constructed with treated wood, right? So maybe creosote treated or treated with other chemicals that eventually leak out into the river, as well as the bricks. Some of these bricks are known to have, these really old bricks are known to have asbestos. There's a cleanup project actually just below the falls, just below the fish ladder. There is a bunch of bricks, Simcoe bricks. They're stamped, and so there's a project underway to remove those. And the good thing about bricks is that those can be removed by hand, and have not too much disturbance when moving those. So yeah. Another photograph here with some pilings. These pilings are a bit shorter, so that's good. We know that pilings in general are generally viewed unfavorably in the scientific community. I would say, in terms of benefit for salmonids, they're usually associated with predators and allow predators a competitive advantage to some extent to predate on native fish. You can see in this photograph too that these pilings are anchored here with some old pieces of wood, or excuse me, metal. Looks like a metal stakes right there. And maybe those are sticking up out of the water here. You know, that's also less desirable and could potentially provide injury to fish. But this is a sloped bank. On the positive side, we've got a gentle slope here, and we've got some gravel and some cobble on top of the bedrock. So not great, but not awful. And then I think a little bit here and there, these small projects where we're being able to take out some of these pilings. A few are being taken out every year. Is a good thing. All right, this one I think is a photograph of like a flotsam floating debris. It kind of represents a log jam, which would occur naturally in streams, and so log jams are actually really good. Not too long ago, like 50 years ago or so, fish biologists would remove log jams and were removing wood from streams. And we now know that that was a bad idea, putting wood back in streams, as I indicated earlier. This photograph, there's no what we call key pieces. So when we say large woody debris, LWD as it's abbreviated, those are like really big pieces of timber is what's desirable. As you can see, also present in this photograph, we've got what looks like a oil boom here that's maybe floated away from where it was supposed to be functioning to contain sheen or any spills, and a little bit of some plastic and other non-natural materials in there. But I guess on the sheen side of things, there's no sheen here. I think actually that might be a tire. Also not great, as I indicated earlier. I know we've got lots of tires and lots of rivers around the state, but tires not awesome for fish and for river habitat.
Hi,
Yeah,
Scott Burr. May I interrupt for just a moment, Mac?
Yeah.
I got a message here from Michael. He said that he's having a hotspot issue and he wanted to ask a few questions from the chat. When is the best time for us to do that? Do you want to go through these photos or do you want to try to address those first?
I'm sorry, the questions from where?
There's people in the online. Yeah.
I'm getting close. You guys can bear with me.
Hey, let's
I
do
only
it.
have a few more pictures. I kind of prefer to just do new questions at the end.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. I'll try to be brief, be concise, if I can. All right, so this photograph looks to me like this is a residential dock. Residential docks, we have Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife has guidelines for. The proliferation of residential docks is not great. That just represents cumulative negative effects. Again, so docks and pilings can be associated, particularly this dock, which is actually maybe a good thing about the upcoming St. John's dock replacement. So that's a solid, this looks to me in this photograph that it's a solid deck. We want to see some light transparency. And so if you think back to some of the photos that Willie shared earlier, the dock upstream at Selwood, that's a mesh topped dock that allows for light to move through. We want light going into the river, This allows for vegetation to grow. And then one of the sort of hypotheses associated with predation around docks is that the predators are able to kind of hang in the shadows below a dock and then move out and prey on unsuspecting fish. But this dock also has the encapsulated foam, which we like to see. And then, some of these larger semi-natural rocks, I think they look pretty natural to me. It doesn't look like concrete. Boulders and cobbles, those are sort of diversity of rock is good. All right, this one from afar. So this appears to be, an armored bank on the opposite shore. There is armored and riprap. These piling structures here are called dolphins, right? So those are this is where large ships will dock. So presumably this is quite deep. It probably doesn't represent that gradual, desirable shallow water habitat. Probably not highly utilized by salmonids. Some of the riprap, we're starting to learn actually that lamprey, adult lamprey may utilize them to some extent, but I would say this is meh habitat, less ideal. And then this one, not too steep, but it's relatively homogeneous, all the same size gravels. I don't know if this is a seawall up at the top of the photograph. It looks like it's probably above the ordinary high, but the seawall, straight wall next to the river is one of the worst things. And then I don't know. This kind of looks like deadish blackberry. Not a lot of vegetation, native vegetation there. Moving into some of the more positive photographs. This one's looking pretty good to me. We've got some sandy habitat here. Again, as Willie mentioned earlier, it's great work with the beaches. That's really cool. Human access project. It's dedicated for human use on beaches, but it turns out juvenile fish also really like this kind of habitat. And not only that, with fine silts and sands, which may be here in the middle pit of the picture, lamprey will utilize those. So, of course, in the top part of the photograph, we can see some more pilings, and we kind of already talked about those. And then last but not least, I think this is probably a photograph from one of the restoration sites. And this is looking great. We've got this gentle sloping bank. We've got some native vegetation. We've got large wood here waiting to be activated at higher flows, and this kind of back water area where juvenile fish could come in and hang out and get out of high flows and maybe forage for insects. All right, that's the last one that I had. Let's see. How do I read questions in the chat? Or maybe
you did great. So I'm gonna. I'm sorry, we're having a little bit of issue here, so I'm having to. I kind of lost my chat thread, so I had to jump on another computer here. But yeah, there are some questions in the chat that I just wanted to get to.
Okay.
We have a couple of hands in the room too.
Sure.
So let's see. There was one by Laura Shire. She's left, but we're recording this, so she'll get an opportunity to see it. But she asked, what kind of habitat spacing might we need in Portland Harbor in order to provide a series of stepping stone or string of pearls for migrating species?
Yeah, I heard her mention that concept. I don't think there's a set distance. I think that any amount of pearls you can put on the string is going to be great. And it's going to really provide benefit to these fish. One of the last things I did want to try to mention to the group, I do think the concept of marginal gains is valuable in thinking about salmon restoration activities and resiliency and habitat. So this concept is where just small things that we can do, once you add them all up, you end up with a big success. So in aggregate, seemingly small marginal gains can amount to being a big uplift. And so that type of approach sounds great to me. I don't know that there's any specific set distance that you would see, but certainly if you're the more the better.
Okay, fantastic. We have a question in the room here. Do you want to?
Hi, Mac. I'm wondering about the numbers. Do you have any idea of the returning numbers of salmon, like maybe over the last decade or so? How many actually return, and how has that changed?
I don't have any figures or anything prepared with specific data on return numbers. An interesting thing about some dams, dams that provide fish passage, such as Willamette Falls, allow us to count fish. And so we do have counts of fish that are going over Willamette Falls and adult fish. So I don't know, I maybe need to get back to you and take a peek through that data. But off the top of my head, I'm not sure. And sort of overall trends, it can vary across species. For example, I know that in recent years, we've had really strong returns of coho salmon in the Clackamas River. And so that means lots more coho migrating through the Portland Harbor as well.
Great, thank you.
We have another question here from the chat thread. So outside of the NRD Restoration Bank, what other restoration work does ODFW and other salmon recovery agencies and groups have planned for the Lower Willamette River, particularly after cleanup occurs? Where can we access these plans?
I would probably need to defer that question to my colleague Becky, who's more involved with the council and more directly involved with some of those restoration projects. Thus far, I think they've been kind of piecemeal and have been put forth by sort of different investors, right? I mean, in Harborton, I guess, example, where PG to some extent is the investor there, that they had that property and chose to do the restoration work. So a big piece of it then comes down to land ownership. So who owns these parcels of land adjacent to the Lower Willamette that we want to restore? And I think that's going to be a critical piece in getting cooperation with them.
Okay. All right. Is there any other questions in the room that anyone has? Okay, I'm going to jump back to the chat then. Okay. One more chat question. How do the very old rotting pilings and old docks on Willamette impact the fish?
Well, again, I mean, at the most basic level, it just represents unnatural habitat. I mean, that's just anthropogenic, human-made structures that are no longer functional, right? I think there's something to be said for that, right? Portland's a working harbor. We've got active docks. We've got active sites, but the places that aren't being utilized and those structures still exist in the water. I advocate for removal where we can. Again, also recognizing that some of those structures are created with treated wood, and we know that some of the chemicals used to treat the wood to ensure that it doesn't decay and rot eventually is leaking out into the watershed. And then also some of the, as I said too, we were talking a little bit about some of the bricks earlier, and that those bricks can also contain harmful chemicals. So and toxins.
Okay, we do have one comment from the room. You wanna go there?
Hey, Matt, it's Willie. I really appreciate the informative presentation, and thanks for the shout out also. I actually just, I have a question, but specific to Ross Island again, so I'll just get you all offline. If that.
Okay, great. Yeah, please.
But thanks.
Yeah, and anybody else is more than welcome to give me a call here. My number and email there on the screen. Please feel free to reach out to me, and we can go from there.
Okay, and so we have one more from the chat thread. Is there funding mechanism, OWEB, for groups doing restoration or OW? There must be. I'm not quite sure what the acronym. But anyway, for groups.
Hi, that was my question.
Yeah, OWEB. I'm not quite sure what that acronym is. So yeah, sorry, Sherry.
Okay, I'm Sherry Duncan. I'm a fish biologist and restoration ecologist with Yakama Nation. And I was talking as an example, OWEB, like what funding sources do you know of are working or active in the lower Willamette area, similar to OWEB? Are there other groups working? Just trying to get at where we can coordinate and collaborate with people.
Funding up.
Yeah, other than the NERDA restoration and NERDA trustee work.
I mean, Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board would be really be one of the primary ones that I'm aware of. If you want to send me an email, I mean, I also recently attended a meeting and a presentation, as I mentioned prior in my presentation, in regards to the IIJA, the Jobs and Infrastructure Act. So that's created a bunch of different funding sources, and it does seem to me that some of those could be utilized. But I need to get back to you and take a look at some of my notes there on all those different funding sources.
Okay, yeah, I'll send you an email and reach out to Becky, trying to, I work a lot up here in Puget Sound and the Superfund sites in this area, and once cleanup has happened or it's moving through, there are other large restoration efforts or those stepping stone projects within those areas that have been cleaned up that aren't, so just kind of looking to the future. I know the PRP should be on the hook to do the restoration, but then outside of that, is there any blanket plans for the lower Willamette River? Like
Right.
A watershed plan, a restoration plan, that's not NERDA specific.
Okay, yeah, and that sort of dovetails into the prior question on sort of what are their plans, and I can't speak to that, unfortunately.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm not aware of it, but I can try to certainly look into it, try to get back to you guys.
Thank you.
All right, thanks for that. Okay, it looks like Barbara, Friends of Baltimore Woods, has her hand up. I just wanted to say, yes, there is access to a copy of the presentation. On the announcement that was sent out, there's a link to the CAG's YouTube page where all of where the presentations are being uploaded there. So, but that's one place where you can go and you'll find this presentation once we get it downloaded and uploaded to the YouTube page. But go ahead and ask your question there.
Great. Yeah, this is Barbara Quinn. I'm an activist out here in North Portland. I've been working on the river plan for the north area. And at that time, what was discussed was the idea of, as Laura Shira mentioned earlier, a string of pearls, that the ideal would be to have places for salmon to get off channel approximately every 2 miles for either for resting and feeding. And I've talked to people who've grown up in this neighborhood, and they talk about, especially down to about where the Toyota facility is now, that there was once shallow water in that area, and the kids in the neighborhood would go down there and catch big salmon and bring them home. So that was 50 years ago. We had salmon habitat here, and now for this 10 miles, we have practically nothing except for that one, the NERDA projects, which are all crammed into one pretty specific area. We don't have anything on the east side. And I guess here's my question. Have you, Mac, have you ever used things, techniques like creating shallow water marshes, or using water plants in shallow areas to create cover and salmon habitat for the small fry?
Yeah, certainly Salmonids will utilize and will utilize those marshy wetland areas. Right there in that area, of course, is the Smith and Bybee lakes. And the juvenile salmon will move into those areas.
Okay.
So yeah, so it doesn't, the amazing thing about salmon is, to some extent, is there salmon and steelhead and salmonids in general, is that resiliency, is that fact that once we make some small improvements to some areas, pretty soon after completing that, we start seeing fish utilized. That goes for things like dam removal, large scale dams, where a dam goes out, and then within a few months, we start seeing this fish know, like, hey, I want to set upstream, let's go past this. And then similarly, as I mentioned earlier, soon after completion of the Harborton site, some juvenile salmonids were detected there. So
yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, yeah, thanks for that question there, Barbara. Thank you so much. And I think we have one last question in the thread. And so if there's anyone, in the virtual space that has a question, please raise your hand, or if there's anyone in the room, go ahead and make your questions known now. But the question on the thread here is a strong salmon run or die-off or die-off contribute to an unhealthy algae.
Michael, you broke up a little bit for me, but
okay.
I heard the question as if there was a strong salmon run and then a bunch of those strong salmon run and a high number of adults returned and spawned and died, would there be potentially a harmful algal bloom associated with that, with those salmon dying? And I don't think so, no. I wouldn't expect to see that. It's sort of a different type of nutrient input than we see with eutrophied habitats, where you have that lead to those algal blooms. Just in so much as by their nature, the distribution of the carcasses across the ecosystem, across the habitat, is going to be relatively dispersed, and so you don't really have this like point source input. So I wouldn't expect it to. I'm not aware of that. But.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Looks like we got one more question from the room here.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know if you can answer this, but it just occurred to me. Have you seen any restoration projects that include bioremediation and fish habitat? Bioremediation in terms of cleaning up toxins here that also creates good fish habitat.
Yeah. I mean, I think that that they can certainly go hand in hand. For example, I mentioned a recent project down below the falls and at the fish ladder, where we're removing. There's been a project to remove those Simcoe bricks. So you think about, removing bricks, removing toxins, and then replacing those with native fill and native soils, that then creates natural habitat potential. So I think it could go hand in hand, and or potentially capping, right? So I mean, if we have to cap some toxic areas, we replace that on top of the cap with native and natural materials. You'll start to see fish potentially utilize it.
Great, thank you.
Well, Mac, thank you so much. This has been a long time getting here. We started approaching Mac about was it 6 months ago? And it worked.
Preparation for the talk. I was like, oh man, you guys emailed me like in the spring of last year, and we weren't able to do it. And then I think I got COVID and broke my leg somewhere.
Right, exactly. So
thanks so much.
Well worth the wait.
Yeah, thank
Okay,
you.
good. Glad to hear it. Thank you for the opportunity, and yeah, thanks for the work that you guys do. And I look forward to continuing to partner with you guys, and either with myself or other staff and personnel within Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife.
Well, definitely so. Well, we hope to have you back again. I don't think this will be the last time you'll be hearing from us. So.
All right.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining us tonight. If there's any more questions for Matt, this is your last chance. So we're closing it down. It looks like got one last one in. Okay, let's go for it, Kyle. All right, you need to unmute yourself. There you go.
Can you hear me? Zoom hates my computer. Is it working?
Yeah, it's doing great now, yeah, for sure.
Actually, just a general update I wanted to get in before everyone logged off. Mac, no question for you. Great presentation, though. I appreciate all the information. I'm the project coordinator for Willamette Cove. I just want to let everyone know that we're doing some sampling in water next week, so you might see some boats and people around that area for the next week or two. We have a couple little samples to collect, so we'll be out there, and we intend to provide more of an update on the sampling effort we've been doing at the collaborative meeting in March. So hopefully people join.
Does Michael work?
Yeah, Kyle, who
Are you BES or Barr?
yeah, are you BES or Barr? Question.
Sorry, you're breaking up. I didn't hear that.
Are you BES for parks, or are you just with the city of Portland?
City.
I'm in BES.
You didn't BES.
Yeah.
Yes.
So okay. All right. Okay, cool. All right. So Mac, thank you so much. Laura here. I want to say thanks to her, and thank you, Willie, for being here. And thanks for everyone for showing up tonight. This was a great presentation. Tons of information was supplied to us, which is fantastic. We'll definitely be able to find this on the CAG's YouTube page, which is in our announcement that we send out via our MailChimp. That there's a link to that as well in the EPA announcement to our MailChimp as well. So if you want to get to those, you can get through it through either EPA or you can get through it through the CAG. I see Laura there. Laura, do you have anything you want to say?
I just wanted to say, show you my face. That's it.
Yeah, great. It's gorgeous as usual.
Thank you, Bruce, mate.
So yeah, so if there's no other announcements or anything that folks want to share tonight, I think we're gonna call it an evening, and we'll just remember next month we'll be having the collaborative. So be conscious and aware of those announcements that will be coming out next month, and there is some gathering with the EPA for our coffee lunch gathering is happening this month as well. Laura, do you remember the date on that?
Well, there is one that just happened January 27th, and so we're still getting the date set for the next one.
Okay,
But there is, no, you're right, there is a meeting though. It's like a Cathedral Park Project Area Working Group meeting, February 24th. And that's under the collaborative. So if anyone's interested in that, just let me know.
All right. Okay. Well, thanks everyone. Thank you so much, and have a good evening. We'll see you next month at the collaborative, and take care of each other. Be talking to you and seeing you all too. Come and see us at our new office as well. We're here all the time, so reach out to us if you want to come down to Green Acre, check out the place, or if you need a place to do a meeting or a gathering. Please reach out to us. It's spaces for our community members as well. Okay. Until next time. Thanks a lot. Thanks everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Feelings would come